testimony today. When we spoke in June during your prior appearance before this committee, I asked you a simple but important question, which is which individual is ultimately responsible for the security of the United States Capitol complex? Who's in charge? Who has ultimate accountability? And that was not a question that you at that hearing, nor your colleagues who testified before the committee in February were able to answer with specificity. And you acknowledged, Mr. Bolton, during that discussion at your last appearance that that was a problem, that the lack of a single individual who's accountable for and has responsibility for the security of the U.S. Capitol is a major management problem and a security risk. That's my assessment. Is that your assessment? And let me ask you the question again now that there's been time to regroup, consider reforms, consider recommendations from this committee. Who is ultimately responsible for the security of the United States Capitol?
Once again, you asked a difficult question. That is, if you look at it strictly from an operational, let's say an operational side, that would be the chief of police. But because the chief also has to coordinate, and you have the House and the Senate and the architect of the Capitol Police Board, that kind of muddies the water in a sense of ultimate responsibility. But if you had to pick the ultimate responsibility, it would fall under the chief of police for security. But that still, again, poses an issue because you still have the board. And it's not, I'm not trying to say that the board doesn't have its roles and responsibilities. Certainly they do. That's not the question here. The question is, who do you look for to having that responsibility for Capitol security? Obviously, if you have an issue or you have a question or a member of your staff does, they're going to go pick up the phone and probably call one or two people, either the chief or on this side, for the Senate side, you're going to be calling the Senate Sergeant of Arms. So again, that does pose a potential problem that exists.
Mr. Bolton, we've engaged extensively with you this year and with your colleagues because there was an egregious security failure which threatened the peaceful transfer of power as required by the Constitution between presidential administrations. I don't need to remind you, but I remind all who are tuned in that that failure resulted in the sacking of the United States Senate, the invasion of the Senate floor, a suspension of constitutionally vital processes. Here we are now, nearly a year later, and the answer to the question, who's in charge, which we've identified repeatedly as being a crucial driver of both the failure to respond promptly to the contingency on January 6th, and also the lack of effective management and sharing of intelligence in the weeks beforehand. No one is in charge. Does that need to change, and how would you change it if you could simply impose a different set of policies and a different org chart?
It kind of pushes me outside of my realm as the Inspector General for the Capitol Police, but I think there's certainly there would be an ability, and this would be something that the committees would have to look long and hard at, where you have maybe something similar to, let's say, the FBI, where you have a director in charge. And that it would answer your question, who's ultimately in charge of the FBI? It's the director. Who's ultimately in charge of the Secret Service? Well, the director of the Secret Service. So that's who you're going to go to hold accountable for any questions that you may have. So that would be something that would have to be thought long and hard because of the uniqueness of the Capitol Police and the various elements, whether it be the House Sergeant of Arms or the Senate Sergeant of Arms or the Architect Capitol, who make up the Capitol Police Board. There are a lot of different moving parts there. It's not as clear-cut and as easy as over in the executive branch.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Well, it's a matter that I think this committee needs to continue to focus on in any management context, in any security context, in any command context. As you know, the lack of a single point of authority and accountability is a major vulnerability, and we've seen the consequences of that in part earlier this year. With my remaining time and begging the chair's indulgence, just one further question for you. I want to express my gratitude and respect and appreciation for the men and women of the United States Capitol Police. I want to express my gratitude and appreciation and understanding of the extraordinary burden that they've had to bear, the tremendous amount of overtime that U.S. Capitol Police personnel have worked. In 2020, officers worked, according to my notes here, over 700,000 hours of mandatory overtime. As USCP union representatives have noted, this is driven by chronic understaffing. There was, of course, a wave of retirements and resignations after the January 6th attack. Congress has an unpredictable schedule. At present, none of this overtime, again, mandatory overtime, 700,000 hours of it in 2020, counts toward the officer's base pay for retirement purposes. My question for you, Mr. Bolton, is what more can Congress do to relieve the extraordinary burden on the U.S. Capitol Police requiring so much mandatory overtime, and to ensure that their compensation and their retirement benefits reflect the true measure of their commitment and sacrifice to the security of the Congress? I can't hear you, Mr. Bolton.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I've been here since 2006 with the Capitol Police Inspector General's office. I have yet to see where any committees or Congress as a whole, or even the board, be an impediment to the Capitol Police in getting the necessary resources and funding required to complete their job. Some of this is a result of the circumstances beyond even either the committee's control or even the Capitol Police's control, whether it be the events of January 6th or just natural retirements or folks wishing to get out of law enforcement. There are many different factors, and I don't want to leave any kind of, I would not leave any kind of impression or that at any time the committees and or the board were an impediment to the Capitol Police in receiving, like I said, funding and or resources. Basically, from my position, it is incumbent upon the Capitol Police to present to the committees and to the board their needs and to be looking forward-looking into potential what they will need, whether it be retirements coming up, need additional classes, or utilizing different aspects in order to bring folks on quicker, whether it may be rehired annuitants, those Capitol Police officers who are coming up on the retirement, as opposed to them going to, let's say, over to the Marshal Service to conduct their court security officers. We keep them here. We just may end up changing into, instead of a uniform, they're wearing a blue blazer. So those kind of ideas where you can have a force multiplier, and those are the type of things that it's really incumbent upon the department to be looking to those type of things. But certainly, like I said, since I've been here, never seen any committees and or board that had inhibited the department from getting those resources.
Okay. Next up, Senator Cruz. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bolton, welcome. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service. On January 6th, all of us in the entire nation was horrified at the terrorist attack that occurred here in Washington, D.C. The violent assault on the Capitol was horrific, and the men and women of the Capitol Police